Hello and welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey, and today we have a Metaverse OG, Tony Parisi. But before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our partner, crypto exchange MEXC. Get up to $4,100 when you sign up using my link in the show notes on YouTube. MEXC has over 1,500 coins, which is a lot more than anyone else. And they have all the cool, 3x leverage coins, which you can use even in the United States, which a lot of exchanges won't let you use them in the United States. They will. And it feels to me like MEXC is going to be a monster exchange. Kind of feels like FTX in the early days. I have been using it myself for several months now, and I really love it. So check it out, MEXC, and use my link in the YouTube show notes. My guest today is Tony Parisi. He is currently Chief Strategy Officer at Lamina1, a new metaverse company he founded with Snow Crash author Neal Stephenson. And he is an early virtual reality pioneer, releasing virtual reality modeling language, otherwise known as VRML, in 1994 alongside our other friend Mark Pesce. And VRML is meant to be sort of the HTML of 3D spaces. And he was also previously head of XR ads in e-commerce at Unity Technologies. So hello, Tony. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you as well. Things are good. I mean, the market's not good, but other than that, personally, things are great.
So you're my DeFi guru. So tell me, what the hell's going on in DeFi right now? Can we start there before we get into talking about?
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about that? Sure. So, the first half of 2022, absolute disaster. We actually did a previous episode of Hash Rate where we analyzed we did an autopsy on all the bodies, right? So, long story short is Terra Luna collapsed amidst a broader sort of inflation fest and recession. And that, but really the Terra Luna collapse destroyed $80 billion worth of value in crypto, which set off a wave of cascading liquidations. And we found out that a lot of centralized entities like Celsius and Three Arrows Capital and Voyager were being hugely irresponsible with their money, having leveraged it to the hilt in DeFi. So when Terra went down,
they disobeyed all of Mark Jeffrey's rules about how to do this, basically, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I'm pretty cautious with that sort of thing. I have been playing with leverage recently, but up until very recently, I didn't even touch it at all. So yeah. Wow. So basically, it's a shit show. I think it's over now. I'm hoping it is. Without a doubt, a lot of the leverage has been burned out. So we're definitely in a lot better shape, if nothing else. So
well, thanks for the clarity, and it's always comforting. I mean, I do look to you as a guide, as someone who's very just DeFi curious and sort of relatively new to crypto in that sense, but someone who's known you for a long time, and it's good to hear that perspective on this with so much kind of anxiety in the greater markets right now. So glad to hear it.
Yeah. Well, you and I have only really gotten to know each other recently, which is weird because we were both doing metaverse stuff in the sort of back half of the 90s. But for some reason, you and I never met. Mark Pesce and I met, but you and I, we never actually crossed paths, although I heard your name many times. So it's good to get to know you. Good to get to know you here in the future, for sure.
All it took was Mark Zuckerberg saying the word metaverse, and here we are. Right? Now we're hanging out all the time.
So metaverse is one of those words, kind of like multimedia, where everyone's got everyone says the word, but everyone's got kind of a different picture in their head of what it really is. So to you, what is the metaverse?
So to me, the metaverse is kind of goes back to the original vision that inspired a lot of us, namely, Neal Stephenson's book, Snow Crash. He coined the term. It was a 3D interface to a future version of the internet. So people had virtual reality hardware. Some had Lux hardware. Some were using these cheap, dumb terminals. But folks were basically accessing a virtual reality internet. And that's what's unfolding around us. So, and that seems to be what folks are envisioning now, though there's a lot of confusion about exactly how that's going to play out, what that means. You see these big game worlds now, like Roblox and Fortnite, and folks point to that and they say that's the metaverse. Well, it's metaverse-like. And so we're getting there, but what we're seeing now is sort of these prototypes of what the metaverse is going to become over the rest of this decade.
So you think of it as a 3D space primarily. It's a virtual reality space, so that does mean 3D. Must you access it with a helmet, or is a screen good enough in your view?
Yeah, so in my opinion, the metaverse needs to be accessed from any kind of device. Our mobile phones, our laptops, game consoles, VR headsets, augmented reality and mixed reality devices that you wear, head worn as well. Eventually smart glasses that everyone's dreaming about, so that, it's also connected to the real world. I mean, just the way the internet is now, there's more and more information that is internet information overlaid on things. When you even pop up on your phone these days, you can use augmented reality to have an experience that's connecting the real world to digital data. So it's going to be more of all that. So there's a lot of folks out there, I think, that are afraid of that sort of matrix or dystopian vision, that we're all going to be stuck in headsets, and living in, Mark Zuckerberg's dystopian world or something, which is, not even by Meta's pronouncement do they think they're going to be doing that, right? At least if you listen to the words they're saying publicly. So no, it's really the heart of it to me, but I'm a technologist. I came up in software. I love 3D graphics. I code it. I'm still technical, even though I'm mostly a gas bag these days, and I do podcasts and do all these other public speaking things. But I can still write code, and I love it. And I'm writing code on my new gig, Lamina1. It's about 3D connecting us. It's about just the next evolution of technology so that we can communicate in all the forms and on all the different devices.
So do you think the metaverse has like a hard geography? Like, there's this bit of land is definitely next to this bit of land. Because I can tell you, I did the palace, right? There was no hard geography to the palace. It was just a bunch of rooms, and each room was a URL, and you could hyperlink to any other room on your server or another server. So there was no hard geography. It was like the web. Where's the top of the web? Well, I don't know. It's just interlinked.
Yeah, what's the shape of the web, right? What's the
right?
map?
So
exactly.
Does the metaverse have a hard shape like the real world?
I do not think so, and this is one of those points of contention that can drive me to distraction. I mean, it's just amazing that you and I never met back in the day, because when Mark and I were doing this originally, the whole point of what we did with VRML was to connect 3D to the existing web, and you could navigate from one place to another with a hyperlink. And that was the whole point. We have digital technology. Why would you use that digital technology to walk around from place to place? I mean, unless the places you're going you want to walk around in. If someone is designing an experience that's meant to be a world you explore or a game experience that you're playing, then within that experience, there's going to be the feeling, the conceit, if you will, the design decision to have people walking around a bit or, moving in some sort of form of locomotion, maybe even teleporting once in a while within that world. Boom, you go from one place to another because it gets a little tedious to look under every rock. But those will follow the design rules of whatever that world is. Just, when you go to a web page today, what is a web page? Is it a video window like we're in now? Is it a place you shop? Is it, text you're reading on someone's Medium post? It depends on what you're trying to do with the experience.
Yeah. So our metaverse, so one comment from Mark Cuban before I go here. So Mark Cuban recently said, I've looked at these metaverses. I looked at Decentraland. It's mostly just a bunch of people gambling. They're not social. You basically see a bunch of 3D avatars gambling, but they're not even talking to each other. There's no, it's not like Lively with chatter the way Twitter is or even Facebook. It's just avatars, and they're gambling. And sometimes they're dancing, sometimes they're walking, but that's kind of it. So,
well, I mean, there's a lot wrapped up in what Mark said. I mean, the gambling part aside, we can come back to that because that also connects to a lot of what's going on in Web3 and other stuff that I'd love to touch on. But what I think Mark's also observing is that when you look at these places today that are what I would call proto-metaverse experiences, they're very new, they're very young, they're very underdeveloped. When I look at something like Decentraland, it's not even as good as what Second Life was when it first came out, which was arguably the first attempt to do a social version of the metaverse. Not done with internet protocols and standards the way one would want to envision it today, but really trying to give you a fully integrated experience where we could socialize, like you did with the Palace, but fully 3D. We could socialize, we had things to do there. And, you can say what you want about Second Life. They still have 1 million active people in there. It's not Facebook scale. But for 20 years running, they've had loyal and intense communities and new people coming in and going. And so it's really underdeveloped yet when you look at any of these newer metaverse worlds, because these are really hard things to build. The technology infrastructure is really intense. The human factors, how you build the interface to communicate, it's a lot, and it takes a lot to get right. So when Mark's talking about Decentraland, I think you know what he's saying, because whenever I've gone in there, what I've found is I see a lot of people's avatars just kind of whizzing past each other. And I honestly think it's because everyone in there goes in there to check it out, and they're trying to just figure out how to operate and move around. And they go, where is this thing? And what do I go see? And there's no guidepost, and there's no engagement to tell you what's going on. And then it will finally coalesce sometimes in a good Decentraland experience where all the avatars find out that there's some live video screen in the 3D world where someone is now coming in from a video feed and they're doing a little concert or something. But then all the avatars are just standing around, and it makes you wonder, couldn't I have just done that, with Instagram Live?
Yeah, just go to YouTube.
Or just go to YouTube, right.
Yeah.
So it's underdeveloped still, and I just think that's just a reflection of where the technology is, and this is a new crop of practitioners building this stuff. It's going to get a lot better. I mean, now imagine that in a more open, place where mom and pop can make these things because the tools are easy, or there's, predefined templates for doing all this, and, so anyone can get in the game, but the interaction design and the level of quality is as good as, say, a Roblox, though people maybe don't look like Legos, or is as good as Fortnite. I think that's what everyone would imagine. It's a beautiful game rendering, but easy enough for folks to get in, customize the world, do their own thing, and all the interaction guesswork's taken out of it, or there's enough to do. There's mechanics in there. There's a quest. There's something you're doing, or there's an economic activity we want to trade. Maybe we're going to go in these things and trade crypto one of these days because someone found a fun way to do that, right? Or do NFT drops. These kind of things could happen. But right now, those are environments that are getting stood up with not enough to do and underdeveloped user experience right now. It's going to get better.
So I'm going to give you my definition of a metaverse, and it's going to be different from yours. I mean, obviously, my experience is colored by the Palace. So the Decentraland is not very social, at least right now. Palace was highly social. I mean, all people did, for the most part, was chat in there, right? And so that's colored my perception. I think the metaverse is a shared cartoon. So the real product of a metaverse is not the metaverse, it's the other people. The shared cartoon is the added expressiveness with which you can interact with those other people. So specific examples, obviously avatars, I can look however I want, but you say something I don't like, I can throw a force lightning bolt at you or make it boo, right? Or I can turn you into a toad, or I can give everyone in the room drinks for 5 minutes, right? Or I can make it snow. So it's sort of like this Harry Potter, Warner Brothers cartoon kind of thing. There's objects that do things like I can throw a portable hole at you, which is a link which sends you somewhere else, right? Those sorts of expressions, as goofy and parlor tricky and cartoonish as they are only possible in a metaverse. You can't do that on Twitter. You can't do that on Facebook. And at least in the Palace environment, we had scripts. So these spells or actions or verbs, they did exist. And today those things would be NFTs, right? So they would be sellable. And they'd be highly coveted, right? I would love to have the NFT which made my avatar 3 times as large as everyone else's, because people love social cachet, and that is the goal of social spaces, is to be the big person in that space, right?
Oh, Mark,
so tell me, what is your reaction to that? What do you think?
I love everything you said. First of all, I would not disagree with it, other than to say I would not restrict my personal definition of the metaverse to only that. But that is going to be one of the major modalities. And in fact, like VR chat, if you know about VR chat, it's one of the VR chat-based social worlds. It's been around for about 5 or 6 years now. So long before this latest metaverse hype happened, they're doing a lot of that. It's a playful, highly social, super engaged community of lots and lots of people. I don't know if they've got a non-VR client now. I think they do, but originally it was all intended to be in headset. They're the closest to that. They get it, and it's more akin spiritually to a Second Life or a Palace. It's about people communicating, getting together. I want to unpack a couple other things you said, though, because they're great. Yes, you cannot open up a cartoon, Warner Brothers, black hole, and teleport through it in Twitter or Discord or on a Twitter space, but I actually think that's where the metaverse is today. The actual metaverse is the Web3 sides. I mean, the magic of this is going to be when all this immersive stuff meets Web3 head on and it's all really working. And so where the action in Web3 now is in Twitter Spaces, people hitting F5 on their OpenSea to see if the mint has happened yet, just refreshing their browser. And imagine what we can do when we're not just stuck looking at each other through these little rectangles and we're doing those kind of things. And so those kind of things are all going to get a 3D skin on them in this coming decade. I almost picture it like, have you seen, read the comic The Watchmen, or seen the film, the great Zack Snyder film? Remember how when Dr. Manhattan's body reconstructed after he was blown up in the nuclear accident? John Osterman. I picture this whole thing forming on top of the skeleton of the stuff we're doing like right now, or these Twitter spaces that I host a weekly one. You've been on one before. That is immersive. We're communicating. We're socializing. What happens when those dynamics get all these cartoon and magical and fantastical tools, including the ability to teleport and not have to walk around anywhere? It's going to be amazing. And so that is the metaverse I'm picturing. But again, in my world, I don't restrict it to these social use cases. Those are great, but when you think about what people want to do for doing business, sometimes they just want like a digital twin of the real world and walk you through the building they want to sell you, or train someone on how to operate in a factory or in a facility. There's a lot of different use cases that I would include in my personal definition of the metaverse. And so between these kind of what I'd consider overly prescriptive views of the metaverse that would include contiguity, I need to be moving around one continuous landscape, I don't believe it. I don't think it's restricted to VR. I don't think it's restricted to social use cases. Once you have those restrictions lifted, a lot of magic can happen and cross-pollination between those things. And now add the other thing you mentioned, a global digital economic system, so that you don't have to reinvent what that virtual economy is every time you and I want to trade goods and services. And that's NFTs and that's crypto. We are building that global infrastructure now. And so, I mean, what is the history of this been so far? So many gamers, Mark, there's so much headwinds in gaming and Web3. They think it's toxic, it's radioactive because of all the bad stuff, the theft, the fraud. And they say, why do I need anything like blockchain? Why do I need NFTs? And you're like, any large-scale virtual world has a digital economy already. And every one of the purveyors of those things, the big game publishers, the Activisions, all these people, they invent a new system every time. And it only works in their economy. What happens when we have this global digital economy where all of these things are possible and they can be paying for goods in the virtual world or potentially goods and services in the physical world? I mean, there's going to be some major magic when all these things come together.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to something you said, because one of my questions is, are metaverses suitable for businesses? I can tell you when we did the Palace, we had we did have business Palace servers. Intel was one of our investors, so they were all excited about, business palaces. And they never worked because, maybe because the Palace was too stupid and goofy feeling, right? It did feel like a cartoon, right? And so it felt wrong. But in your mind, is the metaverse useful for business? And if so, how is it better than Zoom?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to depend on the use case as to how it's better than Zoom. But I absolutely think the metaverse is useful for business. And this is where we need to make some distinctions between the technologies and protocols that go into the creation of the metaverse for social use cases like we already talked about versus, say, a business use case. A distinction between that and specific experiences or places in the metaverse. So when I think of the Palace or Second Life or Roblox or Fortnite, those are specific places intended to create specific social interactions or game experiences that may not be suitable for business use cases. But the very same technology can be used to deploy a simulation where someone wants to learn how to do some new kind of procedure on a piece of equipment, or someone wants to get together for a virtual meeting. Are virtual meetings better than Zoom? We've seen some of these attempts with Horizon trying to do workplaces. I mean, that just seems unbelievably poorly designed for that at this point. But as an early step toward something where we could have possibly a replacement for video conferencing, maybe. I have a very specific point of view on that. I don't think we'll get good 3D video conferencing for business until we can real-time volumetrically scan us, so that it's really me and you, but I can turn my head and you're over there, and there's a meeting of a dozen of us, and we are spatialists. We have that sense of presence. Do people really want to show up as avatars at a business meeting, especially ones that look like somebody's idea of what a human should look like? If it's been a design world, like say in Horizon or one of these other systems, and Sandbox, do I want to be pixelated? I don't, look like Minecraft. I don't think so. So you got to distinguish between the tech, the protocols for communicating in 3D, and these use cases. But there's no reason all this technology couldn't be used for people to host corporate metaverse experiences that were purely business to business, or a marketing use case for somebody wanting to sell you products and they have a virtual salesperson come in and talk to you. All of these things are possible, at least in the way I look at the metaverse.
Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, I haven't seen it work yet for me in a business setting. And, obviously Zuck's metaverse, where he has like people with half bodies. Like, first of all, that's just weird, right? Why are people chopped in half? I just don't like that. But also,
it's a real head scratcher, man.
I see all these. Yeah, I see these avatars around a table, and they're doing the gestures with their hands and everything. But in all honesty, I look at that and I'm like, I'd rather be in a Zoom than that, and that I know that for sure. So I haven't seen the example of it yet that works for me. So I'm hoping to see.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. Let me just
see.
double click on that the Horizon, the Meta thing a little bit more. I mean, one of the reasons I think they've gone down this path with the no legs, it does seem so bizarre, is because they're really focused on headset for these experiences, VR headset, VR hand controllers. And I'm sure, at least from the geek standpoint that are designing the haptics for this, until you have controllers on your feet and you could be walking around, what are we doing with those feet while you're gesturing your hands? Because everything is attempting to be, physical haptic devices versus some, full-bodied cartoon avatar you could teleoperate with your WASD keys or, just by doing some speech or facial recognition. Like, we've got the tech now where it could just figure out what your avatar should do and give you a full body. And we've seen systems like this. I mean, hell, in Second Life, the motions look natural enough when your avatars are walking around just by using your keyboard keys, the arrows or the, WASD. So I don't know. I think they're just coming from I want to think about it generously, that they're gunning for something different, where they're thinking about full embodiment through either haptics or eventually a bunch of sensors in the room around you. And that's why they didn't want to give you fake legs. I mean, I don't know. Don't know what's going on in their minds necessarily, but I do know there's a lot of folks in VR who really are obsessed with, getting you in a suit, Lawnmower Man style, the full suit, right?
Right. Yeah, Ready Player One.
That
was another full suit
Sorry,
thing.
more recent reference for the kids.
Yeah, I was going to say the kids aren't going to know Lawnmower Man like you and I do.
Look it up. It's a great film.
It is a classic, no question about it. So there's a bunch of other stuff I want to get to, but let's, we're a little ways in here. I do want to talk now about Lamina1, because that is the headline, right? So this is a new metaverse company you founded. I think you're a co-founder, right?
I'm the first
with Neal
executive
Stephenson.
hire. Let's say it that way.
So, but Neal Stephenson, who is the guy who wrote Snow Crash, which all of us read. The other seminal book is, of course, a Neuromancer, right, which was sort of in the same time frame, not quite, but close, within 10 years of each other. And I know that within Palace, people would appear in Palace space and be like, oh my God, this is just like Snow Crash or Neuromancer, right? And it got to be such a joke that Jim Bumgardner, who's the other co-founder of the Palace, put a little script in. So anytime anyone said Neuromancer or Snow Crash, it would change the text to that cool book or that other cool book. Right, so it just happened to you, and you'd be like, "Wait, why I said Snow Crash? How come it said that cool book?" Right? Because it became such a cliche, right? So anyway, so now you're working with the guy who wrote that cool book. So tell us what you're doing with Lamina1. What is it, and what are you making?
All right, so Lamina1 is a new blockchain, forked off the Avalanche blockchain. By the way, if anyone knows what your listeners probably know quite a bit about Avalanche, or at least familiar with the name.
They will.
Yeah, it's purpose built to handle the needs of the metaverse in terms of virtual worlds. Like what we have today in these blockchains, the NFTs that have evolved out of the earlier crypto systems for Ethereum and the side chains that have been built to support that, they weren't really designed with the idea that millions and millions of virtual objects are going to be minted in-game and resold at the clip that we're going to see in the coming metaverse. It's a matter of volume and transaction throughput, potentially new approaches to scaling that some folks have tried to do with sidechains and other ways to do this. And so Peter Vessinis, Neal's co-founder, is a longtime Bitcoiner, and he's a technologist. I mean, he's done well with Bitcoin, but he's like a blockchain genius. Like, so if I may be so humble, like my equivalent, sort of my peer, but he's the blockchain guy. I'm the immersive computing person who's got a lot of mileage in this area, and he believes that we're going to need to start fresh, because we need a playground to do the research and development, because we don't know even what the unknowns are yet. Once we start standing up large-scale metaverse worlds. And these could be, million-person simulations. These could be 10 people in a chat world, but lots and lots of them. Trading, minting objects, provisioning virtual land. I mean, we should talk about the land stuff a little bit too. And we want to have a blockchain that can support that. And in addition to that, my role here is to then connect that up to a set of system services, decentralized ideally, up and down the chain, all the way through the stack for delivering content, for multiplayer messaging, for the rendering, for chat, all the things you want to do in a virtual world. A decentralized infrastructure for that. And the final leg of the tripod, if you're building that, the blockchain decentralized system services would be an open tool set, an open ecosystem so anybody can build. And those last two are what I'm focused on. And then, of course, Neal has got some IP ideas for some original kind of content and places in the metaverse that he will be uniquely thoughtful about. And, and by the way, overarching principle of all of this is it's open metaverse. It is all based on standards that the industry is going to develop together. We are an early signatory or founding member of something called the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is currently a giant grab bag of companies and standards organizations just getting started to talk about what we're going to need beyond some basic stuff like GLTF, the file format that I helped create, which is a spiritual successor to VRML. There are millions of GLTF models out there. So you think of it like the JPEG of 3D. You can do full 3D models and scenes. It's supported across the industry. And wow, all of a sudden, an unintended use case. If you want to create an NFT of the 3D object, it's the only file format that all of the marketplaces accept because it's a standard. It actually was just announced yesterday. It's an ISO standard now. So all that stuff I did in VRML 28 years ago finally landed on a standard that's literally used everywhere. Facebook, Meta, Snap. I mean, everyone's used, like Microsoft. If there's 3D and PowerPoint, it's GLTF. I could go down the list. So that's, it's a happy moment, but that's just like the data files, right? That's not all the other things we need, communication protocols and all that. But it's absolutely front and center for Lamina1 that this is all open metaverse. And for us, the bigger the better, because we're operating a blockchain that's going to power the transactions. And the more stuff that's out there, the more transactions on that chain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. So you are an EVM-based metaverse. Got
to do that.
Right? So if you're, right, which is great. I think that's a great choice. You are an Avalanche subnet. There's no other magic sauce to it other than that, I think, at least for right now.
Well, I mean, we're
which I think is a great choice also. Why not?
I mean, there's subnets, and then we're actually
you're
forking it because we want to be able to have
interesting. Okay.
We need the freedom to be able to innovate. If we're just running a subnet, we can't add features. And some of these are, purely about performance and scaling. And Peter's already identified.
So you were forking out.
Peter's already identified a handful of things. Some of them might even be like, okay, we're going to need another chain. You know how Avalanche itself has got 3 different interoperating chains. There might be a new chain for new kind of consensus that's needed. There might be simply performance enhancements on EVM. There's a lot that's like, from caching and other things, the reading side that are real bottlenecks right now. And so, and Peter and I forgot the fellow's name, Goon, I believe, right? I mean, the Avalanche gang and Peter, they're all friends, right? So this is sort of about, how the blockchain world works when it comes to this stuff. There's a lot of it's about innovation, and no one wants, just like the internet. I mean, there's still protocols getting developed all the time to create new capabilities, right? So that's where we're at on this. And it's going to be an interesting journey on the blockchain side of that. And I wish I could speak more intelligently to it. Honestly, I'm just studying at the feet of the master when it comes to Peter, because this is an area where I really don't understand the technology. He talks about Merkle trees and hash graphs and all this stuff, and I glaze over. But then I realize it's not that dissimilar from some of the things you do in 3D. The terminology is a little different. But algorithmically, there's some at least surface similarities there. So I'm doing my best as an old dog to try and learn a few new tricks there. But I'm mostly relying on the wisdom of the whole blockchain team we're going to start to build at the company. And where we are exactly is we launched the company 7 weeks ago. We raised a little seed funding. We're going to raise a little more. And we're going to release some basic, test net later this year, basic software development kit for the game engines and for web. And we'll see where we go from there. And because it's a blockchain, it's an ecosystem, right? So this is a really interesting place to be. And it's great for me. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a job, Mark, where someone said, okay, you go and let's go build an ecosystem, right? Because it's always like the investors, like, what's the product? Where are you going to get your users, right? That's not the way blockchains work, right? They're fundamental technology, and the folks that invest in them and the people that run these, they understand what needs to be open. They understand they need to build community. So, I mean, kind of a dream job. And then add to that, I get on a phone call with Neal Stephenson, who I'd never met. And it met through random circumstances. And we schedule a half an hour phone call, and it turns into an hour and a half. And it just cemented it. I was like, yeah, I got to join this. I had left my job at Unity in April, and I was a free agent for all of 2 weeks. And then I had that phone call with Neal, and I was like, oh, my God.
That was only 2 weeks. I remember that time frame.
Planning on a job. I was just going to screw around, do podcasts with my buddies, do a little consulting, and finish some personal art projects when this came up. And I couldn't say no. I mean, how, like, pinch me. The guy that inspired all of us, and not only did he inspire all of us, though, Mark, he inspired crypto in a big way with Cryptonomicon. That's why he and Peter got to know each other. Live in Seattle, crypto fans. And now it's all come together. It's so wild.
Yeah, so I think, I had an interesting experience with the Palace. So we had 10 million users at its peak, but we couldn't monetize it. There was no business there, mostly because there was no payment rails. We didn't even have PayPal, right, let alone crypto or NFTs. Right?
Remember Cybercash?
Of course, today monetized
about things like Cybercash. It was pre-PayPal.
It was very theoretical, and it was. And so here's the interesting part. So we sold the Palace. We had a bunch of users, but no business model. And we ran out of money, basically. So we sold to a company called communities.com, otherwise known as Electric Communities. And the two founders of that company, Chip and Randy, had done the very first metaverse called Habitat in, I think, the 80s. And it was on Quantum Link, which later became AOL. And they used the word avatar for the very first time to mean what we all use it for today, separately from Neal using the word avatar for the very first time in a novel. And they both came up with that use of that word independently. Neal later learned about Chip and Randy's early work and acknowledges them now in sort of the afterword of Snow Crash, right? So, but anyway, so their company was working on, they didn't really have a product. They had no users, no product, but then they raised like $60 million, like way more than we had raised. And they were working on this very highly complex distributed operating system with its own programming language called E. And they would spend all their time talking about esoteric cryptography and identity and virtual currency and rarity, all things that Palace ignored completely, right? So they looked at Palace as like stupid, cute toy, but for some reason it's got a ton of users. And I looked at them like they were batshit crazy. I was like, why are you focusing on this like esoterica nonsense, right? And that's honestly what I thought at the time. I was polite about it, but I was thinking, you guys are just wasting your time on this PhD bullshit. And as crypto was born and started to progress, as I watched how it worked and how the identity how it worked, how NFTs worked, I realized that I was seeing the manifestation of all the stuff that people at Electric Communities were trying to do. They were right. Everything they were doing was correct.
Yeah,
it was just 20 years too early.
Exactly. Fun side note, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Doug Crawford ahead of tech there?
Crawford
he went on
was,
to create JavaScript. Fun fact for the kids out there.
No slouch, that guy.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, no, I mean, everybody there was brilliant. It was really, it was a privilege to, honestly come to work every day and meet all this. And the older I get, the more I realize what a privilege it really was working with those people.
And it also just does show how some of these developments just take way longer than you'd ever expect.
Yeah, for sure. So talk to me a little bit about Neal, right? So has he ever done a startup before? Does he know what he's getting into here?
And he did work at a very high-profile startup called Magic Leap for 4 years. So I had assumed, like a lot of people would have, and I've learned differently since then in getting to know Neal, that he was on the masthead, that Roni, the CEO, brought him in as a bright, shiny object. But in fact, they went and worked on some really great kind of breakthrough interactive content for the Magic Leap. I mean, that was the purpose for being there. And that Neal's got some pretty good startup chops for a best-selling author. And,
surprising.
And, I'm in stand-up meetings with him every day, and he's like a, real businessman. It's pretty great. So I didn't know what to expect, and
That's good.
The first 90-minute phone call won't
I
tell
wouldn't
you
know either.
until you actually start working with people. No, and it's great. It's actually really encouraging. So, yes, I think a lot of people probably just figure, oh, Neal's going to put his name on this and it's going to stamp a little fairy dust. But no, we're all doing hard work already. Yeah.
Good to know. I had a similar experience with Margaret Atwood, oddly. So I used to do a old This Week in Books podcast. I know, weird, right? So weirdly, Margaret and I are friends. I would say I've driven her around LA a couple times. She's, we follow each other on Twitter. But I figured she was just a famous author, and that was enough for anybody. And but didn't really know anything about electronics or startup world. And it turns out she's got a couple of startups of her own. One called Longpen, and has done some pretty significant stuff in the technology world. So I was very pleasantly surprised to sort of hear that side of her as well. Wasn't expecting.
As we're
that.
living in Neal's world, we sadly might also be living in Margaret's a little bit now, and I'll just leave it at that. But wow, that's impressive. I had no idea.
Yes. Yeah, she's hip to all this stuff as well. So let's get down to some brass tacks here. So how are you guys going to make money? Are you selling NFTs? Are you selling land? Where did the dollars come
one of those
from?
Primary payment rails for the open metaverse, and as to whether NFT,
Will you have a token?
It's going to be a token, right? Yes.
Okay, cool.
As far as NFTs, virtual land, that's other people's business. We want to be the technology that powers that through this blockchain. I'm not saying, I can't even speak to future plans and where the company's going to go in a couple of years, but, the current strategy has nothing to do with selling virtual land ourselves. That said, if folks want to operate large-scale worlds and provision virtual land and subdivide that, we want to have the mechanisms for them to do that in the form of a chain that supports that, potentially ready to go smart contracts to deal with that and verify that. That's going to happen. But that, we're not betting like some, enterprises are on a virtual land model as our business model. But we do believe those things are going to happen for sure. But, that's a whole other kettle of fish, a whole other topic about virtual land speculation, some of the stuff that's going on right now that would appear, to me at least, to be somewhat irrational and overly exuberant. But, as more and more destinations in the metaverse become primary destinations, then I do believe proximity to those places is going to have value. And I think a lot of us do. But we're not going to be placing those bets anytime soon as much as we are going to support those. That said, again, Neal's thinking about the kind of IP that he can create that could be pretty fantastic when it comes to that stuff. Watch the space on that. But yeah, again, we want to be the blockchain that powers most of that stuff, not get into those businesses ourselves necessarily, at least on day one.
So what will this sort of topography look like? Will it be, so it's not one large sprawling world, it's a confederation of worlds where you have sort of the top directory, you're like the Yahoo of all the worlds, and the blockchain undergirding it all. But
we might not
is that
even
correct?
be the Yahoo.
Is it like a confederation?
To be seen. We start with the basic premise that we need a purpose-built blockchain to power this. We need decentralized system services to serve up the data and just run the worlds. Beyond that, we'll have to see how it goes. I mean, what are the core problems right now is like creation needs to be made easier, and it can't just be game engine people who know how to master Unity or Unreal. So everyone can get involved. Wallets are still a complete cluster. There's places that need to be made better. We'll start with some of those. When it comes to discovery, portals, all those kinds of things, I think we're in the pre-days before a Yahoo. Who knows? And it's not, we don't even have a principled belief, or let's say we don't have a mandate where we're going to say all the world's powered by the Lamina1 blockchain will connect to each other. I mean, we're going to create software development kits so people can just operate a game that's on the chain where basically the transactions are happening on the chain. They don't have to have any other connection to the L1 chain at all. All the way to providing some richer set of services where there could be a bunch of open and interoperable products, and the formation of a, if not contiguous, connected metaverse starts to take shape. That is, we all have that hope and vision for that, but we're going to provide utility on day one, just helping people power more and more rich experiences, whether they're built in game engine, on web, wherever.
So the world engines for these things, even though the objects are decentralized and the transactions are decentralized, the world servers themselves are centralized. There's no other way to sort of get the real-time throughput. You don't want the events running through a blockchain. I mean,
Well,
so far, right?
Yeah.
Are you?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Is that part of?
You don't want
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
events
What are your
running
thoughts
through
on
a
that?
blockchain. That's a disaster, right? But
Right.
there's a difference. Blockchain and decentralization are not the same thing, right? So there can be a decentralized set
True.
of system services for serving up content, right? I mean, we're seeing this now with IPFS and Filecoin, just basically serving up the assets. Those are not blockchain. They are decentralized services for delivering data or persisting data. And then people participate in that, however they participate economically. So imagine an ISP of the future is someone who is, not just validating transactions on the blockchain. They might do that. They are providing these system services by, offering up their compute services. Now, they may have rented them from AWS. They may have Iron in their house. They make that choice. But they are putting up a node in the network to serve up game content or to run a messaging server. And there's some, ad hoc peer network for small games. There's all different network configurations. Those don't have to be centralized. They have been historically, just the way a lot of cloud services have been centralized historically over the last decade plus. The economics dictated it then. Basically economies of scale and a bunch of stuff, and the large data center operations and all that. So we may see some sea change there, and and I think in a perfect world for us, it is all decentralized as much as it can be, but you do have to take operational efficiencies and technological efficiency into account in all this. So it may start like Web 2.8, or 2.2, where as we see today in the Ethereum blockchain, there's a couple of centralized API providers, right? I mean, we're not out of the woods even on just regular old Ethereum right now. So it's going to be it's a North Star, but that's where we want to take this. Does that make sense?
Got it. It does. It does. So let's talk a little bit now, because we're getting close to the end of our time together, unfortunately. I could go on for another hour, but tell me a little bit about your time at Unity. What did you do there? What did you learn there?
So
take it away.
That was a great career move for me at the time. I was they sought me out in 2016 after the boom in VR. The whole Oculus period, Palmer Luckey, and then Facebook buying Oculus. There was a big boom around consumer VR with the Rift, and then the HTC Vive that followed that, and the decade leading up to that, I was working on a variety of projects, but honestly, I couldn't get arrested in this town for a while. I mean, nobody gave a crap about basically 3D in any way, or VR for sure. And Palmer had to resurrect that out of the dustbin of history almost. And then all of a sudden, everyone's into VR. And so I was in high demand. I started advising some companies, consulting. All of a sudden, I'm on every stage. I'm writing books. A lot of stuff was going on. And the exec team at Unity found me because they wanted to find someone who was outside but tangential to the game industry. Because what they found was a lot more Unity developers coming from industries outside gaming. Automotive, architecture, cinematic storytelling, educators, psychologists, medical, advertising, creative industry, marketing. And they were all using the Unity engine because it's free to use to get started, at least, until you qualify for needing to pay for a pro license. And it's relatively easy to get on board, an easier tool, arguably, than say the Unreal Engine. There's a lot of debate about that. But, so there's these two big game engines out there. And everyone's using their stuff, and they don't know how to do business except for in the game industry. So they brought me on to help them figure out how to expand into other industries. So for the first year, I was actually working on the editor product side of the two big businesses Unity had at the time, editor and an advertising network on mobile. And I'll get to the ads in a minute because that was what I spent most of my time there on. So I worked on the editor side for a while, and we talked to everyone in the film industry. We talked to all the big auto manufacturers, and we really started to analyze what the business opportunities were going to be there, what needed to happen in the product, because the product was designed for game devs and coders. People needed different workflows. They needed different forms of licensing. They needed to be behind a firewall. All these different needs for corporate clients outside of the game industry. I did that for about a year, and then I jumped over to the side of the business that was raging and started doing some innovation on augmented reality and advertising and built a product. I mean, I was on the business side, but I basically wrote the code, the original prototype. I spun up a whole program to deliver AR advertising units into the mobile games that a couple billion people are playing worldwide, powered by Unity's ad network. And so that was really fun. And I actually, just a month ago, was granted a patent on that. I was pretty psyched about that. My first ever that I actually was granted, so I get to say inventor now for real. It's not fake anymore. And that was around delivering 3D experiences on your phone, but you could turn the camera on and you would have an AR experience like you've probably seen these on the phone, where you could see an object in your living room or your kitchen, whatever, an appliance. How does it look on my countertop? We hadn't put the front-facing stuff on yet. We were about to add some front-facing stuff, so you could do face filters, snap style, but we never got that far with the whole thing. And I did that for about 4 years, and then I kind of pivoted a little bit to do an e-commerce platform that was kind of building on that work to help power 3D storefronts online. And then the metaverse happened, and I had to leave. So it was a fun 6 years almost. It was really good. It was a great time. I rode the wave of the Unity IPO, met a lot of great people. And, I'm kind of a startup guy, so I gave corporate America my time for a while, and that was fun. And it was actually really edifying, humbling, and I learned a lot. It was really good. But it was, at some point just time to move on from that. Again, because all this metaverse stuff was happening.
Totally
and I wasn't going to, just sit on the sidelines for that. No way. I mean, not that Unity's not involved, because everyone's using their engine for this kind of stuff, too. I still talk to my Unity peeps about this right now.
Look,
what's going on in the metaverse, Unity,
Yeah, it's so weird for people like you and me to see the metaverse be hip again, right? It's like we put out rock albums and that were really popular back in the 80s, and then all of a sudden 80s pop albums are like hip again, right?
Again too.
So
they're buying vinyl again. Isn't that awesome?
Right, exactly. What's old is new again, always. So Palmer Luckey, really interesting story. So I'm actually wearing my All In podcast T-shirt. I went to the All In Summit, which is Jason Calacanis and all those guys that do the All In podcast, Kamath, Papataya, etc. And one of their guests was Palmer Luckey. And Palmer gets up on stage and does a whole spiel about Anduril, which is his defense company. And then the second half of his speech is about how much he hates Jason Calacanis and how Jason Calacanis ruined his life. And he's reading all these mean tweets
Jason's
from
up
Jason.
On stage with him, right?
And Palmer, I thought it was no, Jason's backstage, so it's just Palmer, right? So I'm listening to this. I figure it's like a mean twits bit, or that that he arranged with Jason. But as it goes on, I start realizing he's serious and he's fucking pissed, and he is just ripping into Jason and what a horrible person he is. How Jason destroyed his career and how he had to claw his way back. And if it wasn't for Jason, he would have been back in business within 3 years. And he got
sure do know
anyway.
A lot of characters,
so,
don't
we? We sure do. And so after it's all over, Jason comes out and he's like, "Well, that was an interesting speech, right?" And it ended up okay. They ended up sort of making up on stage, and Jason was like, "Look, I'm not powerful enough to destroy you, Palmer. You're far more important than I am." And and it ended up with a hug, and everything was okay. But it was like this. It was like one of the wildest moments I've ever seen at any conference ever.
Sorry,
and then Mark Pesce, your co-conspirator in VRML, just had Palmer on his podcast, and he just put. I haven't listened to it yet. I'm really looking forward to listening to it. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes. But yeah,
brilliant.
so
I got to say, Palmer's growing up. I mean, he was a kid when the Oculus thing happened, and he's maturing. And well, I have my own, I'd say, nuanced view of military-industrial complex and whatnot. What Palmer had to say on that, without spoiling anything, is quite compelling. It's definitely worth a listen. Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, he's a smart dude. There's no question about that.
Your longtime fans
so before we go, and I know
way back too, right? So everybody's all connected.
We do. Yeah. Some people know that. Some people don't. Yeah, we're all intertwined. So before we go, last question. You are working on a rock opera, and I love classic rock and rock operas. So tell us of your what you can about your rock opera.
Being an iconoclast after my own heart, this is another thing we share. We are rockers. I'm a 70s kid, raised in classic rock. So I'll try to do the capsule version of the story. When George Bush was invading Iraq in the early noughts, I was freaked out about religious extremism blowing the entire world up. And I had a lot of PTSD from growing up Christian and evangelical Christian for a while. And so I got inspired, and I don't remember exactly how it happened, but over the course of 3 or 4 years subsequent to that, I wrote a musical, 21 songs, 2 hours, that is the Christian book of the Revelation. It is called Judgment Day. Boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl because the Antichrist comes to earth, enslaves humanity, and the world is destroyed in a cosmic battle between good and evil. And I am now I'm finishing the cast recording for it. So that was written over 10 years ago. I dusted it off during lockdown and COVID and recorded all the demos myself. Talked to my buddy Brett Leonard, the director of Lawnmower Man. He wants to get this thing on stage or film at some point. And I was like, wait, I can't even shop it on Broadway right now. I just got to release the record. And so that's happening imminently. And, of course, then it turned into something really interesting, which is, what am I going to do now? Go pay to get listeners on Spotify after I just, paid to make this record and do all this stuff? No. So that got me looking at music and NFTs and everything. So I'm thinking very hard about how the creator economy is actually changing the game for folks who want to break, new material like this, reach fans differently and everything else. So it's been quite a journey. What's interesting is, so that is now one of 3 musicals I have in play. I've written one other one, and I just started a third one. I don't know what happened, but I was never a huge fan of musical theater when I was younger. But this is, for some reason, how I'm expressing my passion for the art form now. So, yeah, stay tuned for Judgment Day, the musical. I'm going to actually launch the website for it this summer. By the end of the summer, I'm hoping, with at least 1 or 2 of the singles before we master the rest of the album. And, yeah, we're going to have a music one of these days, Mark. I've been listening to your rock and roll, too.
We are. We've never jammed. We'll have to do that at some point for sure. So, all right. Well, I know you've got a hard stop. You got to go. Tony Parisi, Lamina1. Thank you for being on Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.